Hello everybody, Dr. Ryan here, board certified specialist physician. Thank you so much for joining me today, even as we talk about disorders of speech and a clinical approach to such problems. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, I strongly encourage you to smash that subscribe button. Alrighty, so usually when a patient has a problem of speech, it can be globally kind of stratified into aphasia, which refers to difficulty with communicating, right? And that's further partitioned into non-fluent aphasia and fluent aphasia. Or it could be a problem with articulation of words, which has to do with dysarthria. So that's the big departure point, right? Is it aphasia or is it dysarthria? And if it's aphasia, is it non-fluent versus fluent? So if it's non-fluent aphasia, we're thinking if it's global or expressive. So global implies impaired comprehension, with or without a hemiparesis, right? And if there's expressive aphasia, it implies that you have normal comprehension, but you got a problem with expressing, so that's motor aphasia, usually affecting Broca's area, which is in the premotor cortex in the frontal lobe. But if you're dealing with the problem of fluent aphasia, then the problem can't be motor in nature because the patient can kind of respond. Then the problem is either nominal, conductive, transcortical, or receptive. By nominal, we mean that the patient has normal speech but has impaired word finding. They can't find a particular word for a particular circumstance. That is nominal aphasia, a problem with naming. Conduction aphasia is where the patient has normal speech but impaired repetition. Conduction aphasia. And often the problem there is in the fasciculus. I think it's the median longitudinal fasciculus or the arcuate fasciculus, one of those, right? Transcortical aphasia is where you have normal repetition but impaired comprehension. That's transcortical aphasia. Receptive aphasia is where the patient typically cannot understand words spoken to them, and they often make up words. So that's what we call word salad or neologism or jargon or logorrhea, impaired comprehension. So the problem with receptive aphasia is in Wernicke's area, which is in the parietal lobe. Okay, then dysarthria is a problem with articulation of speech, which can be due to cerebellar disease, pseudobulbar palsy, myasthenia gravis, or Parkinsonism. So if the patient's speech is typically slurred or jerky or staccato, detached, right, speech, we talk about cerebellar disease, and often the patient has stigmata of other clinical stigmata of cerebellar problems, right? A pseudobulbar palsy, we think about the so-called hot potato or Donald Duck speech with drooling and emotional lability, right? If the patient has nasal speech with or without tongue fibrillation or fatigability, then we think about either a bulbar palsy or myasthenia gravis. If the patient has soft monotonous speech and akinetic faces, etc., thinking about Parkinsonism. All right. So just in summary, guys, disorders of speech has to do with either aphasia, which is difficulty with communicating, or dysarthria, which is difficulty with articulation. And aphasia is further partitioned into non-fluent and fluent. And from there, we can substratify the particular type of aphasia I'm dealing with. Alrighty. Excuse me. Right, so this is obviously, a view of the brain in sagittal section. And we can see the four main lobes, so frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the occipital lobe. Now, where does the premotor area or Broca's area fit? It is in the frontal lobe. There's a motor speech area. Affectation of this is going to give you a motor or an expressive aphasia, right? And Wernicke's area sits in the parietal lobe. It's a receptive speech area, so patients who can speak but can't understand have expressive aphasia, and that affects Wernicke's area, and that's kind of like a sensory or receptive aphasia, right? Okay, so I think we already covered this. Just to recap, classification of dysphasias or aphasia is the same thing. Difficulty with communicating. Expressive dysphasia is Broca's aphasia, which is motor, typically non-fluent. But receptive affects Wernicke's area, which is sensory, is typically fluent. And that's where you have word salad and neologisms, etc. Nominal dysphasia is a problem with naming things, and if you can't find the proper word in the proper circumstance. And when examining, so we already covered this in our broad approach, but aphasia or dysphasia is divided into fluent and non-fluent. Fluent speech is usually receptive, conductive, or nominal, but it can't be expressive, right? By definition, expressive or motor aphasia is non-fluent, right? So when it comes to naming objects, patients with nominal, conductive, or receptive aphasia will name objects poorly. When it comes to repetition, conductive and receptive aphasic patients cannot repeat, no ifs, ands, or buts, which is a common statement we use to test repetition. In terms of comprehension, only receptive aphasic patients cannot follow commands. Right, but those who have conductive and nominal aphasia can usually follow commands like touch your nose, then touch your chin, then touch your ear. In terms of reading, conductive and receptive aphasic patients may have difficulty, which is what we call dyslexia. And writing, conductive aphasic patients have impaired writing, termed dysgraphia, whereas receptive aphasic patients have abnormal content of writing, very important. Patients with dominant frontal lobe lesions may also have dysgraphia. But when it comes to non-fluent speech or expressive aphasia affecting Broca's area, naming of objects is poor. Repetition may be possible with very great effort. Comprehension often mildly impaired despite the popular belief, but written and verbal commands are followed. When it comes to reading, the patients may have dyslexia, dysgraphia may be present. You want to look for the hemiparesis, and often if in the frontal affectation, we know there's involvement of the face and arm more than the leg. As the patient is usually unaware of their deficit, they are often frustrated and depressed because they can't express themselves. Excuse me. Okay, my friends. The book of Matthew chapter 5 verses 17 through 20 says, whatever enters through the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body. But the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what make a man unclean, but eating with unwashed hands does not make him unclean. Now, Jesus was mentioning this in reference to the Pharisees. So the Pharisees were the scribes and scholars of the day who knew the law very well, right? But their righteousness was merely external. They were so concerned about keeping the law and the traditions and keeping a good testimony before men. But the inside of their heart was full of hypocrisy and greed and malice. Jesus was saying that the righteousness that we have must exceed that of the righteousness of the Pharisees. What does this mean? This means that we don't only concern ourselves with keeping a good testimony on external appearance before men, but we must cleanse the inside of the cup. So inside, where our thoughts are, our thought life must be clean and holy and circumspect. And we can't do this in our own accord. It's only by the inworking, indwelling power of the Holy Spirit that helps us to clean the inside, right? And then we will find that we won't lust, we won't become angry, we won't lose our temper, we won't think negatively of people. And I pray this upon our hearts and lives. Okay, these are my references. Thanks so much for joining me, guys. I'll see you soon with another helpful video in this series. God bless you.